Soft focus is a telltale sign for an amateur filmmaker. So what's the best way to stay in focus? We're gonna look at the practical uses for auto versus manual focus and how we use it in filmmaking. Check it out.
3, 2, 1.
Hey guys, so today we're taking a look at autofocus versus manual focus and the key scenarios where filmmakers and videographers find themselves trying to decide between the two. So with autofocus, the great thing about it is that you really don't have to worry about focusing the camera at all. The software is going to do the work for you. You can focus your attention on framing and doing nice creative camera movements and knowing that your subject's going to be in focus. The disadvantage of autofocus is that the software is not perfect, and depending on what's in your frame, your camera might have this womp womp effect where it's going to switch to the background or just lose focus in the moment that you might need it the most. So it can be a little bit difficult to rely on at all times. With manual focus, the great thing about it is you know what's in focus at any moment in time as long as you pay attention to it, and you can set that focal point. The disadvantage is you have to make sure that you're paying attention to where that focus is, and it's a lot more challenging, especially when you're moving the camera and changing the focal distance from where the subject is in the scene to the camera. Moving that distance is going to make you have to change the focal point, and it could cause some issues or cause you to miss focus, which will ruin your shot. So the one thing you want to make sure of with autofocus is that you're testing the autofocus of the camera that you're using. Different cameras perform differently when it comes to autofocus, and you really want to make sure you do some thorough testing before you rely on it for a shoot. I know that I've run into some scenarios with a few cameras where their autofocus just does not perform as I need it for what I'm using it for. So the biggest thing with autofocus, if you're going to use it, is test it before you do. So the first scenario that I use a ton in filmmaking is rack focusing. Rack focusing is a great tool when you want to draw the viewer's eye from one object to another. It's basically when you're manually focusing on one object and moving that to a different object or subject in your scene. Now, for this scenario, you absolutely have to use manual focus. I know some cameras can allow some tap focusing maneuvers, but it's gonna lock on to different things that you don't want. And the easiest way to do it, set your focus on the first object or subject in your frame, move that to your second object, and you have a perfect cinematic transition that's gonna pull the viewer's eye from one subject to another. So the second scenario is used a ton in videography and filmmaking these days, and that's anything on a gimbal. A lot of people wonder what's the best mode to use, auto or manual focus. For me, it's really gonna depend on the shot that I'm trying to capture. If I'm using a gimbal and the subject is staying the same distance away from the camera, I'm gonna use manual focus. I'm gonna set my focus, keep it locked in, make sure I maintain the distance between my subject and the camera, and then just move myself around the scene and the space or get the shot, keeping that same distance. And as long as I keep that same distance, my subject is definitely gonna be in focus. And I like that certainty that my autofocus isn't just gonna jump in there and move the focus somewhere where I don't want it to be. If the distance between the subject and the camera is gonna be changing, then I will use autofocus. I personally use my A7S II for a lot of my gimbal tricks or gimbal shots, and the autofocus is pretty damn good on it, especially when there's any kind of facial recognition in the shot. So if I'm doing a really high action, high moving shot where the distance between the subject and the camera is changing a lot, then I will rely on that autofocus if I'm a single operator to just hope that the autofocus does its job, keeps that subject in focus, and I get the shot. Now, with the gimbal, a lot of times, even if my subject is gonna stay the same distance away from the camera, I'll elect to use autofocus just because I have a ton of things on my mind if I'm a single shooter, single videographer, and I just want to be worrying about getting different shots in a short period of time. I'll switch that autofocus on, rely on it because I have had experience using this camera, and really just focus on my framing and my shots and make sure to check my shots as I go to make sure there wasn't any focus issues that happened throughout the filming. So the next scenario, which is extremely common in filmmaking, is interviews much like this. Now, in an interview, the subject is staying pretty much the same distance between them and the camera. So I like to use manual focus, lock them on, and as the filmmaker or videographer, really make sure that my subject isn't moving a lot in their position, because if they are and you're on manual focus and you're on a really low aperture number or the aperture is wide open, then they're gonna get out of focus. So watching to make sure that they're staying same distance from the camera, they're not fidgeting back and forth in their chair, and if they are, either instruct them to be more static, or make sure that you're on your focus so you're adjusting for their movements. But typically in an interview, you can lock that manual focus, watch your subject's distance, and be pretty safe that it's not going to change dramatically and that they'll be in focus the whole time. The one scenario that I have run into is if I'm doing any sort of walk and talk interview where I'm trying to follow a subject while they're speaking to the camera. In these situations, if I'm using a reliable autofocus camera, I will give autofocus a try because I'm probably having to watch where I walk, make sure the subject's in frame, and I don't want to pay attention to the focus at the same time unless I got a bit more of a budget, maybe have a focus puller or someone to help me, assisting me with the shoot. So the next scenario is vlogging. Now with vlogging, you gotta use autofocus. You're changing the distance between you and the camera lens a lot with vlogging, so especially if you don't have a screen that pops up in front of your camera and you can't see if you're in focus or not, you wanna just rely on that autofocus to do the work for you, and you're talking to the camera and moving around, walking around, and not having to worry about whether or not you're in focus. There's nothing worse than doing a whole vlog scene and then reviewing your footage later and realizing that you weren't in focus that whole time. So for vlogging, autofocus is the way to go. I use it, make sure that your camera works and you've tested it out, and that's what I do for vlogging. And that's basically it. Those are the key scenarios that I find myself in deciding between manual focus and autofocus. I know a lot of people love that autofocus function, but personally, I like to use manual. I find it's a lot more reliable, and I like having that ability to get cinematic with my rack focusing. Also, a factor to consider is if your lens is native to your camera. If it's not native to your camera, then oftentimes the autofocus isn't gonna work. So if you are looking for a lens, something to take into account. I personally do like getting native lenses for my camera bodies just to have that option if I need it there. But that said, manual focus to me is a more reliable option. I hope you guys found this video helpful. That's it for this episode. If you liked it, smash that like button. If you have any questions, put them in the description below, and stay tuned for the next episode. Peace.